Hello, and welcome to the session, What Admissions Offices Won't Tell You, brought to you by the University of Tampa and our partnership with Beat the GMAT. I'm Gary Christensen, and I'm going to jump right into the overview of where we're going to go today and what we want to cover. I want to start out first with a quick introduction of myself, and I have one of my colleagues on the line as well that will introduce himself as well. And then we've put together 12 different tips and frequently asked questions that we receive from many of our students. And they seem to be very repetitive questions that are very valuable, and we've gotten a lot of feedback from our students that they had no idea the answers to some of these questions, so we felt that presenting on those today would be very helpful. And then we'll wrap it up with questions and answers. I will say, if you want to, you're all in listen-only mode right now, so if you want to send us your questions through the chat box in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen, I'll have somebody filtering those questions to me. Please feel free to submit those questions as I'm going so that you don't forget any of them. I'll try to get to every one of those questions, though, once we get to the end of the presentation. So my name is Gary Christensen. I'm the Director of Graduate Admissions and Enrollment Systems at the University of Tampa. I've been at UT since 2004 in a variety of capacities. I've worked a great deal of my career in the undergraduate admissions area, but then the past 2 years I've been in the graduate area and done a lot of background work since then as well. I did my undergraduate work at the University of Tampa and my graduate work, my MBA, through the Sykes College of Business, which is located here at the University of Tampa next to downtown Tampa. You can say that I really love it here because I'm still here to this day. Dominic, are you on the line?
Yes, I am here.
Could you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Dominic Dietz-Levy. Like Gary said, I'm one of the graduate admissions counselors here at the University of Tampa, so I'll probably be your first contact here when you begin looking into our program. I've actually been through the program, the MBA program. I've been with the university for almost a year now, so I've been to the MBA program, and I'm actually still going through as a part-time student, working on my information systems concentration. And a little bit about our program. We do have 7 different concentrations you can get in your MBA, which is always, of course, something to look into when you are looking into the MBA programs that you want to study. And like Gary said, I'll be here to help answer any questions towards the end and maybe any other areas that Gary wants me to touch on. But thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, Dominic. I appreciate it. So the first tip that I want to go over is probably one of the more obvious ones, but make sure that you study for the GMAT exam. The GMAT is, I'll go into more detail as to how critical it is in the overall admission decision, but it's something that you don't want to take lightly. You need to consider what options you have to prepare for the GMAT rather than just walking in and taking it cold turkey per se. Some different resources that you can consider checking out would be in your College of Business at your school or checking with some different faculty members. I'd also recommend contacting your Career Services office. Sometimes they'll have online CD-ROMs that they can offer to you. They'll also have different courses that they can recommend through different vendors potentially that are in the area. Sometimes, such as at the University of Tampa, we have a GMAT prep class that we'll offer for non-degree credit that's offered over 5 different weekends approximately at a very nominal rate. Many different schools offer such services, so I would strongly recommend doing something like that. The GMAT is a fairly expensive exam, and it's very time intensive, so you really want to make the most of that experience. Some students struggle with the GMAT exam. One of the other things that I recommend is taking the GRE, or at least looking at it. Both are still measuring your propensity for success in a graduate program, and a lot of programs will look at them equally. So some students are just more successful with one than the other. So if you're struggling with the GMAT and you're giving it your best shot, then I would recommend considering the GRE as an alternative. Probably one of the most important things to think about, though, is what do you need for what you want to get? Meaning, are you looking to get a graduate assistantship? Are you looking to get some type of scholarship? Are you going to be a part-time student and you just need enough to get yourself in the door? Are you looking to go to an Ivy League school or not? So also consider what schools are you looking at and what do they require for entrance into the program. You know, if you want to look at a school like Harvard, for instance, with an average GMAT in the high 700s, mid to high 700s, you're going to need to really study pretty hard for the GMAT, whereas if you're looking for another program that an average GMAT is a 500, say, then you're going to need a slightly different profile. So it's definitely worth asking the questions and doing the research ahead of time to see what exactly you need to get into the program and what you need if you're interested in some type of a scholarship, for instance. The second tip that I have to offer to you today is it's never too early to start thinking about your graduate career. And I say this because your transcript is a very, very key item. It's very arguable as to which is more important, standardized test score or your transcript. I would tend to argue on one side that the transcript's perhaps even more important than the standardized test score. Am I insinuating that the test scores are going away? No, I'm not insinuating that at all. However, if we have two different candidates with very similar GMATs, very similar transcripts, and we only have one space left, typically we look a little bit more favorably upon the person with the better profile on the transcript, meaning that with a test score you can walk in there and within a couple hours you've earned that score, versus a transcript shows your personal development and your study habits and your capacity in the classroom over a very long period of time. So to us, a transcript is very important, and that's how a lot of schools view it as well. Obviously, the advice I'm giving you is slightly biased towards how we look at it, but a lot of other schools have shared similar thoughts on that as well. A lot of schools also will look at your overall GPA versus the last 60 credit hours of your GPA. Typically, students in their last 60 hours get a higher GPA. If there's a lower GPA, then that says there's something a little bit off. So if that happened in your case, I would strongly recommend, and this advice comes into the personal statement, which I'll get to later, I would address why it went down, because typically we're trying to figure out what happened if there's a discrepancy between those two. As far as your quantitative and advanced classes, I strongly recommend taking them. When we're looking through somebody's transcript and we're comparing two people for one spot, typically we're going to lean a little bit more towards the person who's taking some more rigorous classes. However, I'll caution you that you need to balance that out in terms of you need to think about if you're going to get straight C's, that's probably not the best avenue to take. You want to make sure that when you sign up for any quant-heavy classes or any advanced classes that you do well in them, because when we're looking at that, we're thinking, well, if you're going to be entering an advanced degree like a MBA or MS in some type of a business class, those are advanced from the undergraduate program, so it's going to be a little bit higher up. So we want to make sure that you have the right skill set to be successful once you enter into the graduate program. And then the final thing that I would also recommend is check with your undergraduate institution, if you're still there, to see if they offer any type of a co-curricular transcript. What that means is some schools will actually track the experiential education or internships that you participate in. That's very attractive to graduate programs who are looking at a large number of students that have to fill a very small number of spaces. So when we see that you've been involved and you have a lot of outside of the classroom experience, that says to us that you're very dynamic and you're going to be bringing in a lot of good content that is beyond what's in the actual classroom. So that's looked upon very favorably in the evaluation and admission decision process. My third tip is evaluate your schools on a level playing field. You want to make sure when you're considering the different schools to attend, the different graduate programs, that you're comparing apples to apples. So my recommended matrix for doing this would be, first, look at what type of agencies have accredited them or rated them. So like, for instance, AACSB is one of the largest players internationally. And so with AACSB accreditation, by having that, a school has to maintain a certain faculty ratio, The faculty have to output a significant amount of research, and the classroom has to maintain a certain percentage of PhDs in it, meaning that they can have adjunct professors, so like somebody that's working in the field that has a credential that they're able to teach, they have to maintain that. So if they slip below that, they risk losing that accreditation. So in other words, when you're comparing different schools that maybe you don't know as much about them, this helps you better understand what they've done to ensure that the quality of their program is very high. Another thing to consider is the faculty. So for instance, you want to make sure that the faculty to student ratio is very reasonable for what you learn best under. And that ties in very closely to the class sizes. So if you learn really well in a large classroom setting, then you should probably give some serious consideration to some state schools, because typically those classrooms are larger. There are private schools and public schools that don't necessarily fit that profile, but for the most part, that's the way it works. I would recommend checking out each school and finding out specifically, though. If you don't learn as well in a large classroom, then you probably more than likely want to look a little bit more closely at some private schools. There are private schools that have average class sizes anywhere from 10 to 25, and then there are others that have larger class sizes, more like 35 to 40. So depending on what suits you best in your learning environment, you want to make sure when you go to graduate school you get everything that you're paying for. You're paying for an advanced education, so you want to make sure that you get the most out of it. Another thing to consider is the location. So for instance, when I talk about the University of Tampa, we're right next to downtown Tampa. So typically the students that come to University of Tampa come because they want to participate in internships. Due to our location, we have a very strong relationship with our Career Services Department and a lot of the corporations in downtown Tampa. So if you're really concerned about getting some work experience, you want to make sure that you find a job before you graduate, you probably want to look very closely at finding a school that is in a good downtown location or somewhere close to some major companies, just so that you have a better chance of finding a job. However, if that's not important to you, obviously you can look at those schools, sure, but then you can also look at other schools that maybe aren't located in such places. Finally, I would recommend looking at the alumni network. So if you're concerned about having alums spread throughout the world, that's typically a good sign that the Career Services Department and the faculty have really strong ties throughout the world in terms of being able to place the students. Whereas if the alums are mostly concentrated in a specific area, then you know that a lot of those relationships are established more locally. So depending on what your long-term goals are and where you'd like to go, that's just one thing to particularly look into. Now for the fourth tip. The personal statement is a very delicate thing. You want to be careful what you share in your personal statement. We're not putting you in the hot seat with a personal statement. We just want to learn more about you. We get a lot of documents from you. We see your resume. We see your transcripts. We get your GMAT. So in the personal statement, we want to know what do we not already know about you from those documents. So when you repeat them, it's often very boring for the admissions office and the admissions committee to review those. So make sure that you make it very relevant to you and your experience and something that we don't already know. Probably one of the simplest tips that is most frequently overlooked is please check and double check it. Make sure that your grammar is correct. Look for typos. Take it to a writing center that if you're at an undergraduate institution that can critique it, just to make sure. This is our first impression of you, frankly, and the admissions committee often doesn't even have a chance to meet you prior to making the admission decision. So this is essentially your first impression on them. So you want to make sure you make a great impression on them, and there's no better way than making it a very, very polished document. And please don't submit a book because the admissions committee will not read the entire thing. Usually 1 to 2 pages is very sufficient. but don't keep repeating yourself. If you find yourself repeating different points within the document, then that says that you need to cut it down and look for something new to cover, or you need to look at just making it a shorter document overall. So tip number 5 relates to your resume. Your resume is also another important document, and it helps us better understand what you've done outside of the classroom. So this is a great place if you have any work experience to document that. That's probably the most obvious thing to put on your resume. But also any internships or research experience. So for instance, at UT in the undergraduate program, there's a SAP Strategic Analysis program that students work with a company and do consulting. So if you have a program similar to that in your undergraduate experience, that's something that you should strongly consider putting on your resume. That helps us better understand what types of skills you've acquired in your past experience, and it helps us understand where you'd like to go in your studies. So like Dominic was even talking about doing a concentration in a specific area. That'll help your admissions counselor with tailoring our communications to you so that we know, the MIS department is hosting a speaker series about a specific topic in that field. Well, then your admissions counselor can reach out to you and say, by the way, we're sponsoring this activity and we'd really like to have you come to campus, and if you're able to join and listen and sit in on this, we'd be more than happy to welcome you to that opportunity. So it really helps us with communicating to you, but then also making sure that in the classroom that we're shaping, that we have a good, diverse set of students. So the more details you give us in the resume, the better chance we have of making a very diverse classroom, because we're not just worried about how many students do we get. We want to make sure that the classroom is very diverse in terms of the types of students and the backgrounds that they bring. Everybody is not just learning from the faculty, but also from the experiences of interacting with their peers in the program. One final recommendation I have with a resume is seriously consider getting it critiqued. Your career services office will definitely have somebody on hand that can assist you with that. Some schools offer that at a free charge. Others offer it at a nominal fee. No matter what, that's something that is worth almost any cost, because that's going to really help your application stand out from everyone else's. So I would strongly recommend doing that. You could also look at Career Builder, who also offers a similar service. It's more expensive than your career services office, more than likely. However, again, it's important to think of these things not as the actual fee itself, but think of it as being an investment in yourself and your future. And don't forget, as you think of questions about anything that I'm talking about, please feel free to shoot those into that chat window. Recommendation number 6 is the role of your admissions counselor at the graduate school you're applying to. Think of the admissions counselor as your personal coach. Sometimes students think that we're here and we're trying to be really tough and we're trying to really cut back on who we let in. Actually, no, that's not quite the case. We really want you to be successful. We want to see students do great things in their life. Nothing does us greater pleasure, or nothing gives us greater pleasure than students coming back a couple years later telling us how successful they've been because of their experience that they had with us and through our program. That really makes us feel good at the end of the day. So we're really concerned about your personal success. So when we're working with you and giving you advice, we're doing it because we want to make sure that you're as successful as possible. So my biggest recommendation is make sure you get your admissions counselor involved early on. It's never too early to start asking for their opinion and giving them advice, or asking for their advice, because they've seen a variety of different situations and they can offer recommendations. So even when you're facing a question about a specific class and whether it would be an advisable class that would really help distinguish you from other applicants, even simple things like that would be a good recommendation to consider taking. So the application process, I've started to allude to this, and hopefully I will make it extremely clear by the end of this presentation that you want to get this process started early. So make sure that you do your research early on and know exactly what it is you want to continue on to do. I would strongly recommend getting your application in before the deadline. This ties back to the role of your admission counselor, who's looking out for your best interests and trying to help make you as successful as possible. So if you submit all your documents before the deadline, they still have a chance to email you or call you and say, hey, you missed doing this, or we don't have something specific that we really need. You're almost there. Whereas if the deadline, you submitted at midnight of the deadline day, we miss that opportunity already. And we want to make sure that we've got you ready to go to the admissions committee because, a lot rides on those decisions. So definitely, I strongly recommend trying to get everything in before the deadline. And by the way, you don't have to submit everything as one big packet. In fact, we actually prefer as you prepare documents, so submit your application. Don't worry about sending us your personal statement and resume all in one package. Once you take the GMAT, submit the GMAT. So piecemeal it together. That's perfectly fine. If you already have the entire packet, that's great too. But if you give us everything one piece at a time, we can start coaching you through the process and alerting you to any deadlines or any special offers that we can help to expedite the admission process for you. Because again, we're really trying to look out for your best interest and trying to make the process as painless as possible for you. Not to mention it breaks down the whole process so it doesn't seem nearly as overwhelming if you're piecing it to us one document at a time. So definitely I would strongly recommend for any schools that you're considering attending, get your application in as soon as possible. School will be getting in touch with you about any other documents that are needed. They'll be talking about deadlines, so on and so forth. My one disclaimer about that is definitely check out each of the individual schools. There are a very, very few schools anymore that do want all the documents together. That's definitely not the majority anymore. So I would recommend checking it out, but definitely start just piecing your documents together so we can coach you through the process. So for tip number 8, a lot of students ask us how important is the GMAT and why is it that we use standardized tests? Well, it's difficult when we've never met students or interacted with them before to put them all on a similar playing field. Even with transcripts, one of the difficult things is grade inflation. If you do a Google search on that, it's a very hot topic right now. So we really need a good, equitable way of measuring academic ability. And so although the standardized tests, there are many articles out there that question whether they really are an equitable distribution, it's the best way that we have of measuring it right now. And like I said, we as an institution want you to be successful. We don't want you to come here for a semester and then not be successful and leave or not graduate. We want everybody to graduate because frankly, you're our potential success story, and we want to have as many success stories walking out there as possible. Any institution wants that. So that's why schools typically require the standardized tests. We want to make sure that students that enter the classroom are going to be successful. Now, that's not to say that everybody is evaluating purely off of the GMAT or GRE or any other standardized test. You need to look specifically at each school because every school has a slight variation in how they actually weight the GMAT. So for instance, some schools will do what's called super scoring, where they'll look at the highest score within each battery. So like for instance on the GMAT, there's the verbal and quant section. So if you took the GMAT 2 times, you got a better score the first time on the verbal, a better score the second time on the quant. They'll take the combination of those two and recalculate what your composite score is, and then in theory you'll have a higher overall score. Not every school does that. It's a mixed bag at this point. From our surveys up to this point, we've heard about half and half are doing that right now. At UT, we actually look at GMATs, and we weight that about 50% with the transcripts. Now, that's not to say that we ignore everything else, because we're also taking into account the personal statement and the resume that's submitted as well. That can actually sway our decisions one way or the other. So a big portion is given to the academic ability because we just simply can't dismiss that. The curriculum that is offered in graduate business programs is very quantitative heavy, and we want to make sure that you're successful. As I've said several times before, that's our ultimate goal. So we're really trying to look at the whole picture and take into consideration all the facts that we have sitting in front of us. Tip number 9. If you're interested in finding ways to pay for graduate school, you definitely need to get on the ball early. Typically for graduate school, it's a little bit different from undergrad in the sense that scholarships and graduate assistantships aren't nearly as commonly used as they are in an undergraduate program. For undergraduate, you submit the FAFSA, and you, as a domestic student or as an international student, you just get a merit scholarship and different types of institutional aid in either case. And then as domestic students, you'll get some gift aid from the government as well. In grad school, it's a very different landscape. Most schools will offer graduate assistantships, which come with a work requirement and some type of a stipend with a tuition waiver. But as far as federal aid for domestic students, typically that just amounts to an offering of loans. So scholarships are becoming a more prominent thing, but they generally aren't nearly as sizable as what undergraduate scholarships have become. So if you're looking for a good way to get your tuition paid for and you're looking to be a full-time student, you definitely want to take advantage of, or start looking at this early on so you can take advantage of it, because everybody is looking for this type of money. In fact, students will specifically defer to a future term just so that they have a better chance of getting any type of quote-unquote free money. With that being said, I've mentioned 2 different types of aid. There's the work commitment, which is a graduate assistantship. So what that means for most schools is about a 20-hour work week that you're dedicated to either an administrative office or an academic office assisting with various duties and sometimes research as well. There are some that are up and coming where there's no work experience, or sorry, no work commitment required. And those are obviously even more favorable to students, but not all institutions offer that. It's a fairly new type of scholarship. Scholarships are just a new type of aid to the graduate world, but they are up and coming. But either way, regardless of which type of money, free money you're looking for, you need to plan to have a strong GPA and a strong GMAT and GRE. I would also recommend having some work experience or some internships and research under your belt. That just makes your profile look that much more attractive in terms of who the school is going to want to have assisting them with various projects on more of an administrative type of a capacity per se. Tip number 10. So I always, whenever I speak with prospective students, I always try to back up the question and first say, why are you going to graduate school? What is it you ultimately wish to accomplish? And almost every student says, well, I want a better job. I want to, place myself ahead of everybody else. I want to have a higher paying job. I want to have a, be ranked higher on the scale in the workplace, in the hierarchy of the workplace. So that's why most students go to graduate school, and yet, interestingly enough, a lot of students don't ever think to ask about career services. So that's why I felt it was so important to list this in the presentation. I strongly recommend that you ask the admissions counselors at any school you're considering attending about their career services. What does that include? Check out the website, give them a call. Just interview them. Ask them about what types of interactions they have with the graduate students. See if they have somebody dedicated to working with graduate students as well. These are the people who will help you quite a bit, in addition to the faculty, with locating a job near the end of your graduate degree. I'd also recommend looking at who are some of the alums and what are they doing at this point. Where are they placed? So for instance, I always cover at UT, whenever I talk about the University of Tampa, I'm always mentioning where some of our alums have gone internationally, not to mention domestically. They're all over the place, which is great. It says that we've got connections throughout the world. And under that, I would strongly recommend looking at the placement rates. So a lot of schools won't even mention that because they aren't very good. And by a placement rate, I would say that at least a 90% placement rate or greater is a very good placement rate in terms of 90% of the classes placed within 6 months of graduation. That says that your odds are pretty good for finding a job by the time you graduate. I would also recommend looking at who are the feeder employers. Where are the majority of the students going to work? Are they all going to one company, or is there a diverse portfolio of employers that are picking up the students? So like, for instance, at UT, we have a very diverse portfolio, so much so that we have our own version of Monster.com. However, it's limited to just UT current students as well as alums, where employers are able to place job postings on there where they're specifically looking to recruit our own students. So finding out from schools you're considering, do they have something similar to that where you can review the list of employers to see, have you thought about an employer you're interested in working for, and are they on that list? One of the final points that I want to make about job placement is be very careful of falling into the average salary trap. They can be very flawed in the sense that there's a very, very different cost of living between cities. So for instance, the cost of living in Tampa versus the cost of living in a major metropolitan area such as New York City are very, very distinctive and very, very different. So when you look at the average salary between a school in Tampa versus a school in New York, it's going to be very different simply because the cost of living is very different. So make sure when you're comparing the average salaries, go to a website such as salary.com and see what that differential is so that you can make sure that you're playing on a level playing field in terms of the average salaries. And the last tip that I have has to do with rankings. This is a very hot topic, and I've personally attended a couple of conferences where on the administrative side they talk about rankings. And it was very interesting to hear at one of the most recent ones, they actually said that the purpose of the rankings back in the 80s when they first came up with them wasn't so much so that students would say, I have to go to one of the top 50 schools. It was more of to showcase, here are some of the schools that are doing something new and innovative, not so much as what it's become that if I don't go to one of the top 50 schools, I just won't be successful. The purpose of the rankings has really changed quite a bit in a very, very short period of time, relatively speaking. I think probably the most important thing, even more important than the rank of a school, is to think about your fit in the program. Let's say that you get into the school that's ranked number 1 or number 2 on the list, but you have a miserable experience and don't learn anything. Did you really get that much out of the experience? Because once you get to the workplace, if you don't acquire the skill set through the program, then it doesn't really matter what name is on the diploma because you did yourself a disservice by not getting as much out of it as you could. So it's really important to make sure that you have a good fit with the program, and I think that's where working closely with your admissions counselor as well as doing a site visit, a class visit, a school visit, just to see how do you fit into it. Is this a program that has the right class sizes, that meets your matrix of requirements? Another thing to think about is also, where do the schools invest? Are they investing purely in just getting into the rankings? Or are they investing in the students and making sure that their best interests are being met? That's another important consideration to make. For instance, looking at the difference in tuition. If you pay double the price to go to a school that's higher up in the rankings, but you're going to make the same amount of money in the end and end up with a very similar job, where can you get a better value for the same degree by going to a different school? So that's an important question to think about. In some cases it works out that way, in other cases it doesn't, but it's something that you definitely want to at least give some thought to. And finally, don't forget with the matrix that I was talking about earlier with the accrediting bodies, the whole point of those accrediting bodies is to make sure that they put schools on a level playing field. So, for instance, earlier I was talking about AACSB accreditation says that you can go to any AACSB accredited school and it's pretty standard product or output that they're all going to have, because all the faculty are required to have very similar credentials, and all of the research that they're doing has to be very similar. So it's not like there's really a leg up between one or the other. They're all pretty much on a very similar playing field. So that's another important thing to think about. So in summary, I just want to go over some of the real quick highlights. First, make sure that you start preparing. Even if you're in your senior year now, you still have plenty of time. If you're in your junior year, I would still recommend maybe don't think about it every day, but start thinking about it really soon about what is it that you want to do, and start putting together a game plan, talk with some faculty members, so on and so forth. Keep an open mind when you're doing your research as well, because sometimes what you find out through research can be rather surprising and may be counterintuitive. So make sure when you're doing the investigation process that you're open to possibilities, because you're investing in your future and really your life success, in terms of going through the program. Make sure that you establish criteria in your program search and prioritize it appropriately. Everybody's list is going to be different. I gave you a sample of my matrix, and it could be very different for you. It might be the same list, but in a different order. I just so happened to put it in the order of what was most important to me when I was considering what graduate program to go through. And then one of the last things that I would say is very important that we just went over is look for superior job placement rates. That's assuming that the reason you're getting a graduate business degree is because you want to get a better job. If that's not why you're in it, then that probably should change to some other bullet. But the majority of students are most interested in finding a job after they graduate. So I would say definitely look for a really strong, solid job placement rate when you're considering graduate business programs. And because you all sat through my presentation today and registered, I have put you all in our system for an application fee waiver. So when you go through the application, if you choose to apply at the University of Tampa at ut.edu/apply, when you get to the end of the application and after you click submit, a box will appear to say, did you receive a fee waiver? If you check that box, it should appear that it'll validate that you've been marked for a fee waiver. If you have any problems with that, do feel free to reach out to me. But at this point, let me see if I have any questions. It doesn't appear that I have any questions at this time. Well, please feel free that if you do think of any questions, feel free to email me. My email address is gchristensen@ut.edu. And I'm more than happy to respond to you. And if you have questions for Dominic, I can also get you in touch with Dominic. But thank you for your time today. I greatly appreciate it. And
Hey, Gary.
Yes.
Hi, this is Jennifer with Beat the GMAT. We do have a couple questions if you would like to take some.
Oh, you do? Oh, okay, sure.
Yeah.
I was scrolling down and then it froze, I guess. So sorry.
Oh, no worries.
Please go ahead.
Okay. So here's a question. Does Sykes have a 1-year/2-year full-time MBA program?
Yes, we do have a, depending on how many hours you take a semester, yes, you can complete it within 1 to 2 years as a full-time MBA student.
Okay. Let's see. Here's another question. Do you have tips on how to make yourself stand out if applying to the Top 10. Everyone is so unique and admissions is so competitive, given you have a solid GMAT and GPA. Seems impossible to be sure you'll get noticed.
Some of the things that I've heard are very quirky, and I'm not that creative of a person, but I've heard about people attaching just odd things, and I do believe it's a big challenge. I'm not sure that I really have a good tip for that in a top 10 because they get thousands of applications. That's a really tricky thing. I would say think about things that make you unique, because at the same time you don't want to misrepresent yourself in the sense of you want to make sure that it's who you truly are at the same time. But think about what distinguishes you among people that you know. Think about past classroom experiences and what's made you stand out from your peers, and think about how you can expand off of that. It may be something that you even want to talk about with some friends, maybe talk about it with a faculty member that's had you in class to say, what really stood out to you? Maybe ask a couple different faculty members to find out what was it, and then run with that and start getting creative in your thought process as far as how can I make that shine in my application.
Okay. All right, let's see. Here's another question. How would you say a one-year MBA program differs from a two-year MBA program?
Well, I often tell students they can get through an MBA in as quickly as they want to get through it, pretty much. My personal 2 cents worth on it is that I go back to why is it you're getting an MBA? You're getting an MBA because you want to acquire the skill set to be more successful in the workplace. So then I go back to, well, if you're going to rush through it, are you really getting everything you can get out of it, or are you just doing the work so you get the 3 letters behind your name? So to me, I recommend to students that they take more than a year is my personal recommendation when possible, because you want to make sure that you get everything out of that experience, because there are a lot of people out there that have an MBA, but the ones that really stand out, they're the ones that actually understand the content and they're able to apply it in a different way than everybody else.
Okay. Here's another question. One of our students has expressed that they've explored the Sykes website and they were unable to find any placement data. Do you have any updates on just the recent placements at Sykes?
Yeah, it's actually located under the Career Services section under Post-Graduation Employment Information, and I believe the last placement rate was, I believe, 93%, I want to say, was the last number that I saw.
All
So
right,
93%.
thank you.
Yeah, 93% of the students were placed within 6 months of graduation.
All right, here's another question. When you are reading recommendation letters from a teacher, work colleague, etc., what do you look for?
We're looking for information and insight into how they are in the classroom, how the applicant performs in the classroom, also looking for any type of cues in terms of their academic ability, as well as just their street smarts in the sense of how are they going to perform in the workplace after they graduate. We're looking for any kind of red flags as well that say there may be something going on here, that every school is looking for that. So we want to make sure that we get somebody that's going to be a really good fit in the program. So just culturally, we think about what type of students we already have in the profile for the upcoming semester, and then we think about what kind of person is going to complement that. So we're also looking for character traits in there as well to help us in that process.
Sure. All right, here's another question from one of our attendees. What options, if any, are available for post-9/11 GI Bill students?
That varies from institution to institution. At UT, we actually have somebody dedicated to giving very specific information on those benefits. So if that person asking the question wants to shoot me an email, I can get them in touch with our Veterans Benefit Coordinator.
All right, here's another one. What percent of the students at Sykes are international?
Roughly 40% of our students come from abroad in Sykes College of Business. On campus, we have 126 different countries represented, so we have a very diverse group of students on campus. Within the graduate program, we've got about 40 countries represented.
Here's another question, more specifically from one of our Indian students. They have expressed that they're graded on a 10-point GPA scale. How would that be converted to a standard 4.0 GPA according to U.S. standards?
Actually, we normally go through the WES evaluation process when we can't convert it, and typically for those conversions, we have to go through WES. So the student just submits it to WES with our institution code, and then they submit the final report to us. So we actually don't do that translation in-house, and most schools handle it that way, actually.
All right, here's a question in regards to round 3 admissions. What do you find universities are looking for, just overall?
At that stage in the game, it's usually the final shaping of the class, so it's a much more difficult stage to be admitted for, and that's because they've already filled a lot of their seats. So at that point, we're looking for the missing gap. So if we have a bunch of people already admitted, I'm going to very oversimplify this example, but if we have a bunch of people already in the financial industry admitted in the program, then we're going to be looking for people who are, from another background, like an IT background, for instance, or somebody from a marketing background. So we want to make sure that we have a very diverse class. So before we even enter that stage, we're looking at who's already in the profile and who's already committed to coming to our institution. And then we're saying, what are we lacking in this profile? And that's pretty much how it works for most places, because we also, every school wants to be able to say they've got, very diverse group of students on campus.
All right, thank you. Here's another question. So for the student who may have like a candidacy weakness, let's say low GMAT or low GPA, how can they still be successful when applying and hopefully getting accepted into an MBA program of their choice? Any tips?
Well, it depends. It depends on which program they're applying to. I guess the first piece of advice I would have is be realistic in terms of contacting admissions counselors at the program that you're interested in and telling them, point blank, here's what my profile looks like. What do you recommend that I do? The admissions counselors can't often tell you exactly what will happen if you complete the application process, but they can give you very specific advice. So like, for instance, if it's a low GPA, depending on how low it is, and what GMAT and what personal statement comes with it, so on and so forth, we might recommend go take this specific class or 2 or 3 to help bring your GPA up. But if you have a 2.0 GPA, it's going to be a really big stretch. So we're going to have to try to find other things to do. And if the counselor, depending on the institution, they may point blank say there's just no way we'll be able to admit that specific GPA, for instance. So that's why I say get your counselor involved early, because they can offer those types of recommendations from the get-go. As far as the GMAT, I would go back to make sure that you're studying, make sure you check out all the resources you have available to you through your undergraduate institution. Look at what's available online, and then also, if you've exhausted all those options, also consider looking at a GRE as an alternative.
You mentioned reaching out to the counselor. So I know one of the students did ask a question in regards to, does a school kind of specifically advise or choose a set counselor that will advise that student during their MBA career? And how do you recommend that that student reaches out to their counselor?
Well, there's two different, I think we're talking about different things. So once a student matriculates and is actually put on campus, they're handed over for course-related things. Let me back that up. For course-related questions and advising, there is an actual advisor assigned to them that's more academic in nature, whereas for admissions-related items, there's an admissions counselor. And when I said to get in touch with somebody on campus, I was referring to the admissions counselor who helps you with getting the documents in and is very intimately familiar with the admission process. Typically, the advisors, the academic advisors, aren't as knowledgeable. So for the admissions counselors to reach out to them, you'd want to check out the admissions webpage. So typically when you go to a university or a college's homepage, there's a very prominent link at the very homepage that says graduate admissions or admissions, and from there you're able to find office contact information in those subpages.
Thank you, Gary. At Sykes, are internships a mandatory course?
At Sykes?
Mm-hmm.
No, they aren't mandatory. However, a very strong percentage of our students do it. Because of our downtown location and a lot of our students, our placement rate's extremely high, and that's because of our location and because so many of our students do choose to take advantage of those internships. UT is a huge proponent in the realm of experiential education, so the faculty are constantly reinforcing that point. So no, it's not required, it's not mandatory, but they push pretty hard for it.
Thank you. Well, it looks like we don't have any new questions at this time. So we do have about 5 minutes remaining. So for all of those who are still listening to today's webinar, if there are any further questions that you have, please feel free to send them our way, and I'll make sure that we give them to Gary for him to answer for you. Let's see, I think a new one just came in. Oh, Gary, if you could please share your email.
Sure, it's GCHRISTENSEN@ut.edu. So Christensen@ut.edu.
All right, well, it doesn't look like we're going to be getting any new questions at this time. But thanks, Gary, for all the great tips that you had to share.
All right, great. Thank you. And thank you to everyone for listening and joining us today.
All right, thanks, everyone. Thanks
Bye.
for joining.